Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a good day. That was absolutely an amazing panel, and I guarantee you're going to want to stay for the next one. So my name is Maeve Campbell. I'm a climate journalist from London, and I'm pleased to be hosting this next session where we're posing the question, is nature an economic choice? So nature has an inherent, unquantifiable worth. We obviously rely on trees, we rely on plants, air, soil for our very existence. But in the capitalist world that we live in, the question is, do we even recognize that worth? So the ecosystem provides us with services. Bees pollinate our crops, plants clean our air, they store carbon, and all of these services contribute trillions to the global economy. But looking at nature in economic terms might seem like a paradox, but it's crucial if we're going to save this absolutely indispensable resource. So the question is, how do you transform priceless ecosystems into assets? Before we move on to our panel in a few minutes, please welcome Jamie Batho from the Land Banking Group to go into a bit more detail.
Hello, everyone. Can everybody hear me OK? Is that all right? Amazing. Hello, my name's Jamie. Thank you. I think the first thing to say is thank you for having me, and thank you to the Change Now team for putting us in a place like this. I think when you're in grand places, the worst thing that can happen is that we all feel a little bit more grand. So thank you for fueling our egos. Now, we're here to talk about the question that Maeve just posed, is nature an economic choice? And I think that's a very philosophical question on one hand. I think it's also a very practical question on the other hand. So let me first start with a little bit of blundering philosophy, and then we'll try and land it somewhere practical. I'm not from Paris, as you can probably hear, and I think like most tourists that come to Paris, when you're walking through the streets of Paris, you're forced to reckon with what this city has been at the center of for the last few centuries. You walk past places like the Hôtel de Ville, and you see the Renaissance. You walk past the Panthéon, and you think the Enlightenment. And you walk past the Place de la Bastille, and you think the Revolution. And I'm sure there's many people speaking here who are going to try and paint pictures between the revolution and whatever they're talking about. So let me try and do that, and then you can tell me later who did it best. But I think there are some distinct correlations, similarities between the French Revolution and our economic relationship with nature. Back then, it was the revolution was a rejection of a social and economic system, and a system that pushed people and pushed the majority of people to the edges of society, taxed their labor, taxed their wealth, and treated them as the bank that will keep on paying. And now we do the same thing with nature. We have an economy now where we've decided the only way for us to create wealth, for us to fuel our economy, is by pushing nature and the people that steward nature to the edges of our economy to extract, and treat nature as the bank that will always pay. And just as back then, the first and second estates, the clergy and the nobility, couldn't have imagined a reason why that system might snap for them, nor could we have imagined a reason why our system might snap. Except we could have always predicted this. We knew that it was going to end up in the situation we are now. We've had scientists and NGOs shouting at us for decades, telling us we need to change or the system will snap, nature will snap, and we start to now see it. We see, just yesterday we had the news that 84% of the world's corals are exposed to record temperatures and bleaching events. That's not insignificant. That is a third of marine life, 1 billion people that are supported by those systems. So is investing into that nature a good economic choice? I think it is. when in Davos this year, we heard a story of a food corporate, one of the largest food and beverages companies, who said, I know I'm exposed to degradation of biodiversity, the breakdown of my soils. What does it really mean? So they priced it. They went through an exercise of pricing that risk, and what they found out was that when they ran their cash flow models out for the next 5 years, they had no business model. Their equity story was completely eroded after 5 years unless they invested. So in that case as well, I think investing into nature seems like a good economic choice. And then we have the very big things like the Amazon. I mean, right now the Amazon is at 17% deforested. If we get to 20%, we're told again with the latest science from this year that that will turn the Amazon from a rainforest system into a savanna, completely changing the hydrological systems in South America, essentially meaning that all the breadbaskets fail. Supply chains get deleted, they don't exist anymore. But not only that, we have a humanitarian crisis like we've never really reckoned with. So is investing into that nature also a good economic choice? I think it is. So on the one hand, it's almost very easy. What an easy decision to make. It's clear that it pays. On the other hand, it's not that easy because we don't actually make economic decisions about nature at that level with those numbers. We make them in every single little decision we make, business by business, investor by investor, farmer by farmer, and ultimately hectare by hectare. And it's only when we zoom into that level of detail do we figure out where we're really stuck. I mean, we live in a world where the farmer, she tells us, I can't change my practices to increase biodiversity, because if I do, I'm at risk of not being able to pay back my debt burden that I need to pay back after the next harvest. The forestry company tells us, any money I spend on conservation is money out of the window because it doesn't add anything to my balance sheet. I don't get anything for it. The food company tells us, I do feel like I'm someone that should invest. I do have these risks, but why should I be the first one to recognize I have these risks, be punished by the capital markets for being risky, and then when I invest, why would I do that if the whole value chain benefits from just me making that investment? And then you have the investment class sitting there saying, Jamie, I hear you, I understand your story, nature is value, but please show me where the financial products are that allow me to put 250, 500 million ticket sizes into nature and get a return back. So that's a little bit of where I think we're stuck. It's in the middle of knowing that there is value somewhere. We feel it, it's evident, but we can't see it. We can't find it in our system. We can't point to it, and therefore we can't invest into it. And the good news is we have a solution for identifying value up and down an economy, and it's called a balance sheet. Balance sheets are those things we use at every layer in the economy to describe these are the assets that I sit on, these are the liabilities that I have, and this is the wealth this is the value that I sit on. So how do we pool nature onto those balance sheets? And now let me get a little bit technical. I'm going to show a chart. This is a little bit of the journey that we see towards nature really being on the balance sheet. And let me talk you through it. And if we look at this, when we go from the left up this staircase, we're building our nature balance sheet. We're creating balance sheets and creating value or describing value. And if we start from the right, we're starting to reward and starting to incentivize. So this is where we are right now. I think starting in the bottom left, natural capital assessments. This is the whole sphere of disclosure of the really hard work that our friends at the TNFD have done to bring us 500 companies with $17 trillion worth of assets under management to the point where they're now assessing their relationship to nature. We have these huge companies saying, what are my risks, what are my opportunities? So that feels good. That feels like progress. The second step is natural capital accounting. This is not something new. This has been around for a long, long time. But essentially, all it is structured data sets that describe stocks of natural capital, biodiversity, soil, carbon, water, and ecosystem services. And these are the things that allow us to point to the value. We can look at an asset, we can look at a landscape, and we can say, here is the economic value that nature gives to me in this landscape. I'll skip over 3 for now, because that's the tough one, and I'll get to 5. If we go all the way up to the top of the economy almost, this is where you have the governments and the regulators, where we need to be in a position where government decisions, subsidy regimes, direct spending encourage investment into nature, and central banks encourage investment into nature, capital adequacy ratios, stress testing. This stuff is starting to happen. It's not anywhere where we near where we need it, but it's starting. And the fourth step, coming down the ladder from the right, natural capital assets are priced in capital markets. We heard in January the Financial Stability Board said there could be panic in the financial markets because all of these risks might cause a tsunami of revaluations that would dry up investment, dry up loan books, and that's scary. But what that means in step 4 is that the companies that do invest into nature, that do invest into that value, will be seen as good assets. They will be invested into, and it will pay to invest into nature purely because you are a good asset. So what does it mean then to be in that middle box, to have nature on the balance sheet? Well, a few things need to happen, of course. We're on the left-hand side here, we're describing value, we're kind of pushing value up into the system. And on the right-hand side, we have the system looking at where that value is and trying to reward it. And in the middle, we have our accounts, we have our balance sheets, and we need, of course, repricing of our current assets that we hold, if any of this is going to hold true. But we also need a way to invest. And right now, we don't have the instruments, we don't have the tools that allow us to put money into nature and hold it on our balance sheets. We have lots of things lying around, carbon credits, which are great, but they're for offsetting. They are for causing harm and doing good. We have debt for nature swaps, which are also great, but they are slow. We have philanthropy, which is great, but it's very small. And we have biodiversity credits, but we don't really have biodiversity credits. So this is where what we are working on at the Land Banking Group comes in, and where we think technology helps us to play a couple of tricks to keep us in this middle box here. At the Land Banking Group, what we're doing is deploying technology. I mean, we're in the midst of a technology revolution right now with high resolution, Earth observation, bioacoustics, meta barcoding, all these fantastic technologies that allow us to very quickly and very cheaply now build natural capital accounts. So we can have on a platform the status of nature described hectare by hectare and through time. So we have the ability to index decisions now on nature. And that natural capital account now allows us to issue contracts. We can enter into a contract around those stocks of natural capital that we can describe in the account, and they can be, as we are trying to make them, balance sheet grade. And they can be, I'm going to get a little bit, one step again technical, but they can be balance sheet grade because they meet the asset test that auditors and accountants throw at us for what is an asset. Well, firstly, it needs to be identifiable. Can you point to the thing? So we just described the natural capital account allows us to point to the thing. It's this bit of nature. The second thing that has to be is controllable. It has to be a legal right that I hold, that I can transfer or I can hold. So that's why you have a contract. A contract gives you that controllability. And the third thing is it has to hold future economic value. And that, as we've just been discussing, is becoming a little bit more obvious and clearer to paint that picture. So now we have an instrument that you can put on balance sheets. You can put money into nature and hold that value on your balance sheets. And we're starting to see lots of companies using it. So we're working with food corporates where they invest into their value chain and their balance sheet is strengthened because of it. We're working with forestry companies where they invest into biodiversity corridors, more diverse planting regimes, and their balance sheet is stronger because of it. We're working with structured finance providers to have investment flow via structured finance products into these systems. And ultimately, we're working with farmers and with conservation organizations to help them get paid for the nature they steward rather than just for the crops that they deliver. So that's the big conceptual journey and a little bit of the role that we're trying to play. But where does all that leave us? I guess it leaves us with a lot of work to do. If any of this is to be true, then there's a lot of work still to be done. But I think it also leaves us with a lot of opportunity. We have the ability now to put money into nature and to have value back from it. And that, for me, feels like the foundations of a bit of a new economy. It feels like one where the food corporate can invest. It feels like the one where the forestry company will invest. It feels like the one where the farmer will get paid for the crops and for the biodiversity. And I think as we look around and we think about the massive change that we need, that system feels much more like a revolution of reason than a revolution of ruin, which we see in other parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. That was Jamie Batho from the Land Banking Group. So it's now time for the panel. I'm going to introduce you before they come on. So we've got Rachel Colby-Samoon. Rachel is the head of sustainable sourcing and nature initiatives at Kering. I'm sure you all know Kering because we're in Paris, but if you don't, Kering brands include Gucci, Yves Saint Laurent, Balenciaga, Alexander McQueen, and many, many more. So this is Rachel, head of sustainable sourcing. Next, we have Mathilde Mignon. Mathilde works at EcoAct, which is an international sustainability consultancy headquartered in Paris, and she is the group director of nature and tech-based solutions. Lastly, we have Farwiza, or Wiza Farhan. Wiza is a forest conservationist working to restore, protect, and conserve the Losa ecosystem, which is a rainforest in Sumatra, the largest island in Indonesia. The Losa ecosystem is the last place on Earth where rhinos, tigers, elephants, and orangutans still roam together in the wild. So please give them a big round of applause. So, I feel like we're all quite far away from each other, but it's fine. We can make up for it with intimate conversation. So just to say, the way I like to do panels is nice and spontaneous. So that means it's a dialogue. So if I ask a question to one person, but someone else has something to say, feel free to chime in. Dialogue rather than monologue. So Mathilde, I was going to start with you. Nature does so many things for us, but I don't think we don't think about its value in financial terms. Why is it important that we do that?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, Maeve. Thank you very much, and hi, everyone. So nature has like financial terms. So basically, the reflection that we need to have here is that we are asking and we are waiting for massive investment into nature. So the way I want to start like thinking about this reflection is on a business perspective. How do we engage the business, and then go back to what makes sense for businesses. So if we take only one number, basically, which is from the World Economic Forum, what they say is that if we, like the World Economic Forum estimates that if we have like an improved stewardship of natural capital, we could actually like really improve the way we work with nature and we manage nature, sort of. We could actually unlock $10 trillion annually in business opportunities. So basically, not only nature helps that business prosperity, but we are also dependent on nature. And conversation side, I will definitely like give the floor to Kering and to Rachel to talk about like how do we need nature. But for me, it's really a reflection on it's part of like it's linked to our business prosperity, and it's definitely important in the way that we are going to make decisions as part of a company. Yeah. If we want corporates to get involved in the Paris Agreement efforts, we need to sort of like speak their language to make it like very easy. And to speak their language means like integrating within their framework, integrating this like financial aspect. They need to invest in the reduction, like in reducing their emission. But in the same time, if we want to invest in nature, we need those framework, and those framework will help them like make decision in investments.
Yeah.
And maybe one thing on this about numbers. Why do we need to use those financial terms? Sort of like, is because basically we are the crucial challenge here in this debate about nature is that we need to scale up those investments. We are not where we are. Basically, financial terms, we need, and developing countries, they need $1 trillion annually to reach their needs. And countries are only mobilizing 300 billion annually. So this shortfall isn't just a number.
Yeah.
It's basically climate solution left unfunded. It's communities left vulnerable. It's emission continuing not to be abated. So basically, we need those investments to be able to reach the Paris Agreement objectives.
So Rachel, what do you think? It's nature is, according to Mathilde, a climate solution left unfunded. Do you think that by putting a price tag on nature, by viewing it through financial terms, it will better help us to protect it rather than exploit it?
So I don't know if saying price tag is the right word, because that might be what's causing confusion in terms of whether it's ethical to think that we should actually put a price tag on nature. But if we do take it from a business perspective, what we can be sure of is that there are very clearly calculable ecosystem services that absolutely are so useful to so many. And these ecosystem services, sometimes they happen just naturally. Sometimes they happen thanks to land stewardship done by humans, all sorts of humans, local communities or farmers, etc. And I think that putting value on that as what are the systems and the services that help us, and when we preserve those systems or we preserve other areas, the actual asset that entails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like the sun has come out just to blind us.
No, it's to say that it's right. We're spot on.
On a nature panel, it's very apt. But excuse me if I look blind, because I'm struggling. So Rachel, I'm really interested because obviously you work for Kering. Kering, owns multiple fashion brands that we've all heard of. I imagine that you're sourcing a lot of cotton, a lot of wool from around the world. Looking down your supply chain, how do you make sure that you're working with and not against nature all over the world?
So thanks for this question, because it's true that it's been very important for Kering for a long time. As many of you probably know, we've been using the environmental profit and loss statement, so the EPNL, for over 10 years now, to be really clear on exactly what are the impacts and dependencies that we have on the different areas, whether it be water pollution, greenhouse gases, land use. And we've put an economic factor on that to have a clearer sense of what is that cost to others, and what does that mean, and how does that denote what our responsibility is to do that. So it's something that's very close to us, but then there's an additional element that we're increasingly aware of, because the consequences of climate change are becoming so visible. We're starting to realize that there is a real resilience issue. When we look at this environmental profit and loss for us, we know that about 2/3 of it is on agriculture.
Okay.
You're talking about wool. This is a beautiful wool suit by Alexander McQueen.
Would you like to model it for everyone?
Right. Yeah, here we go.
A lovely wool suit.
I don't know how to model exactly, but and it's sustainable wool. Because what we've done is we've gone both ways. We've gone from our stores up the value chain, but then when we realized that sometimes you can get maybe organic or most of the time conventional, how can we actually spark being able to get what would be regenerative? I was listening to a very interesting talk this morning by Marc-André Sellos, who was explaining that organic is good, but it's really not going to help us in terms of getting those ecosystemic services in place. And that's why actually going toward regenerative agriculture is going to enable having the quality of the soils that are going to create that resilience and help adapt to climate change. So we started the Regenerative Fund for Nature back in 2021 to actually work within our value chains, including wool, to help the farmers be able to transition towards the kind of practices that would enable that supply chain to grow. And it's interesting, we chose to do a fund because the idea is that this can't be done by just one actor. We actually all have to group together, sort of align the way that we're moving forward, and have it a way where there's a great momentum that builds. And from there, then working on this value chain traceability, both up and down, we can be sure that there's even a better benefit sharing, for example. So that when we talk about resilience, of course, resilience is not only environmental, it's also very much socioeconomic. And we have to be sure that the farmers are going to be paid for the valuable services they render. And it's bringing it all together that it actually makes it that we can continue providing this type of quality garments for people.
And by having a regenerative fund, does that mean that the cost isn't brought onto the consumer? It's a philanthropic fund, or?
It's a philanthropic fund.
Yeah.
But actually, increasingly, we're trying to really work with the grantees. We have about 12 projects in 8 different countries on also leather and cashmere are the 2 other commodities. And we work with the grantees, and some are in this room, actually, to see how do we go beyond philanthropy. Because philanthropy, we might think of it as a seed capital for jump-starting and initiating some regenerative practices. But what we really need to do is to build it to the actual economic system that works for the different stakeholders who are involved.
Yeah.
So we're looking to see solutions like what Jamie was talking about earlier. How can we actually show that value? And that gets into a lot of fuzzy areas that we are accustomed to not knowing how to calculate. How do you calculate the well-being of a person? When you say you improve a farmer's livelihoods, how do you actually calculate that out? And who should be helping to pay for those benefits? Should it be the health ministry because there's fewer public health issues? Or when you even look at the types of environmental ecosystemic services that they're providing, and that we know that the healthier soil is going to help manage the water, the rainfall that's following after too much drought. And we're going to avoid the kinds of floods that we just saw in Valencia, where there are factories that have nothing to do with farming who lost considerable amounts of money and had their assets damaged. Who should be paying into this stewardship? Because just how vast of a number of different types of stakeholders are actually benefiting when we do make these steps towards a more healthier ecosystem.
Absolutely, it's a great question. Who should be paying in? Weeza, I want to turn to you. Do you have an answer to that question? Who do you think should be paying for the nature restoration? You know, you live in one of the most biodiverse landscapes in the world, and you see the impacts on the ground, I'm sure. Tell us your thoughts.
I mean, of course, that's a difficult question, truly, who should be paying? And in so many ways, we tend to pass on the responsibility of who should be paying to those that do have resources. Sometimes I tend to think that commodification of nature could be a dangerous path. In one way, sure, we need to think about economic opportunity for those in the grassroots when you compare initiatives like conservation that maybe does not bring direct economic benefits, and intervention like exploitation that may bring immediate economic benefits, but then long-term consequences in so many ways. And if I think about landscape where I worked in the Loiser ecosystem in Sumatra, a lot of people might know Aceh as one of that province that got impacted by 2004 tsunami that impacted Thailand, Sumatra, India, Sri Lanka. But very few knows a year later, there's another tsunami from the mountain that happened to the people on the East Coast. That was a huge flash flood that destroyed almost entire district.
When was that?
2005.
Right.
And the economic consequences of that flash flood was equal to the provincial budget for a year. So when we think of investing in nature, like it or not, we will be paying when we're not investing in nature. When flash and landslide and every natural disaster have an economic consequences. Yeah. So really, there has been a whole lot of calculation. There has been a lot of science that goes into this. We have been warned for many decades about the need to invest in nature, but the world somehow is not necessarily ready to move in that direction. And also, sometimes when we think about creating payment for ecosystem services project or a carbon project, there is an exclusivity and trade-off that we are locking the land and the area away from the grassroots communities who have been using that areas for generations. So are we doing this in the right way? Are we thinking about it in a just and sustainable manner? Sorry to throw more questions back at you.
No, very interesting. I mean, it's always nice to end with a question. That leads me on, I'm thinking of two things. One, you say, we've known about this for so long, but we don't seem to be addressing it. Mathilde, you work with companies at your consultancy in Paris. from my experience, I don't know if you'd agree, I think climate seems to be more trendy than nature. You know, everyone, you know, people seem to understand about carbon emissions, but they don't seem to be as on board with nature initiatives. Have you found that in your work? And if so, how do you galvanize companies to put nature at the forefront of their commercial strategies?
It's an interesting question because the idea is not to oppose climate and nature.
No.
Obviously, it goes together, and one is helping the other. So it's interesting to see when they are separated into corporates, while it's actually, and I guess you're actually tackling both. So basically, you're talking about the project and like how you're working in some very vulnerable regions, and how like we need those investments in those regions. At EcoAct, we help organizations that are far away sometimes from those regions to understand how they could invest in those projects and how they can link all of those activities, because you said you cannot invest, but at some point you will pay. That's the point. And I really like that point, because basically what we're trying to explain to corporates is like you have to obviously reduce within your value chain, invest in your value chain to try to reduce as much as you can within your scope of activity, within your core business. But you need to invest outside. And when we think outside, we think climate and nature globally. Basically, as project developer, we work on different type of projects. And let's take, for example, one type of project. We are developing like a mangrove project, so project restoration, where we will preserve and restore mangrove forest. We will doing the same with forestry. We're working on like energy efficiency, etc. And you can think about the different tools that are helping the emission sequestration, but they are also helping nature. Yeah. Basically, when you think about mangroves, you're not only trying to sequester, and for mangrove it's like 5 times more than like any tropical forest when you actually plant mangrove trees. Mm-hmm. You are also creating habitat for like birds, and you're also like creating a habitat that are going to create more resources for like fishermen and for people like living from those like natural habitats. So basically, we always see them together as we develop nature-based solution. Yeah. We are a developer of nature-based solution, so type of projects, but in those nature, we will account for the carbon that we remove or that we reduce from or that we avoid from the atmosphere. And we will look at all of those like other SDGs. Yeah. And so climate action, SDG 13, goes with 15 and 14.
Hand in hand.
Life on land, life below water. So all of those goes together.
Yeah. I appreciate that it's much more of a holistic approach. I think that's definitely the right way to go. And Rachel and Louisa, I want you to both just come in here. I want to make sure that we're talking about long-term nature restoration when we talk about this, because you're living in the ecosystem. I'm sure you see when people come in and make projects that are have a shelf life and they don't last too long. I think when it comes to investing money into nature restoration, investors usually want quick wins and short returns. So what does a return on investment in nature look like, Rachel?
Well, for us, I mean, because we are nature dependent, I guess the long-term investment just makes a lot of sense, which is why we're trying always to get ever closer to our farmers, to recognize the efforts that they're making, help them along in that transition, because if we don't do that, we won't have the materials that we need for our own business. And so above and beyond the responsibility that we have at Caring, we think that it's just good business sense. Yeah. So for the long-term investment, it makes sense. And it also, what we're looking at increasingly, we're working a lot on nature positive and water positive, et cetera. And we realize that you're talking about landscapes. We have to go above and beyond just the plots that we're working on. A plot is going to do well because it's the neighboring land or water bodies are also doing well. There's a continuum within nature that is sometimes forgotten about. So we're going to, just as we tend to isolate variables or we try to make everything quite linear, we're sort of doing the same thing to nature, and maybe that's to Louisa's point, when in fact we have to consider what are these interdependencies and linkages, and how do we work on that whole ensemble. And I guess that's why I was trying to bring forth this idea of who should pay, because it's not to to say that we shouldn't pay, we should, and we do. But then who are the additional beneficiaries who should also recognize those services they're benefiting from? Because if we don't have everybody pay, then nobody even realizes the benefits and the actual value that is there for them.
And what does everybody pay look like? Do we all need to pay in this room? Do we all need to pay for nature? How can we do that?
Well, I think that there are little bits here and there that are being tried out, like working with water utilities companies who realize that when the farming is improved and they have a more regenerative approach, then they're actually going to have incredible savings when it comes to their own purification needs. So there are some of these ecosystemic services that are now fairly well recognized in more and more countries, and I think this is the type of idea. So a public utility oftentimes is going to be on tax money. Well, it's interesting to see how much of that money can and should be allotted to helping that transition of the farm, so that then suddenly you have, of course, caring, buying something from the farmers with an improved price, and we're recognizing the good work they're doing. Then other types of commodities those farmers are also doing who are also carried forward by other actors as well. But then, third circle, the larger impacts of the way the basin is being improved, so that that road doesn't have to be cleaned up because the land hasn't eroded and then now blocked the traffic in that road because of the poor soils. So we really see that I think we have to bring to light that those real savings.
Yeah, and the connections.
And the connections.
Yeah.
What I'm still struggling with, though, I have to admit, this is our big thing that we're working on now, is how do we show the creation of value?
Yeah.
So you talk about long-term, we can talk about how we're going to make a supply chain resilient. You talk about long-term, and we can talk about how we're going to help adapt to climate change. We can talk about how we mitigate risk and actually act on those risks. And all of that is a long-term return. But for the short term, there are other questions. And this is where I think we have to be really innovative to think about who is actually going to see that value creation in a more immediate way.
Yeah.
So suddenly we think this means that we don't want just one financial pathway. We actually have to embrace the diversity of different types of financial profiles. Different ones who are going to have a different risk appetite, who are going to have a different expectation in terms of return. Maybe they want a bigger return, but they're prepared to have a grace period for 5 years before they start bringing that in.
Yeah.
That could be just enough time to get over the valley of the way farmers can actually transition to regenerative.
Yeah.
And if we take biodiversity literally, and we say that in any of our systems, if we want them to be viable, we have to have that same biodiversity.
Yeah.
And so we have to have that same diversification of corporates, but diversification of financial institutional players, and build with that type of mosaic.
So what would you say to the audience, just as a last word? If you were to spread the word and say to corporates or businesses in this room one thing they could do for nature, what would it be?
Oh. Okay. Work with your neighbors.
Okay, great. Mathilde?
Yeah, work with your neighbors.
Reduce and invest now, because 2050 is tomorrow.
Okay, 2050 is tomorrow. Love that. Weezer?
Well, I actually would like to extend an invitation to open your heart. When you think about economy and nature and the climate and the planet, more like allowing yourself to see yourself as part of the solutions. Because really, when I think about conservation, sometimes people have always thought conservation is such an exclusive club, but in reality, all of us enjoy the benefits that the ecosystem is giving us. Why not all of us take part in protecting it, restoring it, conserving it?
Thank you so much. Please give my panel a big round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have one last part to the panel, which is with Dr. David Dow. David Dow is the co-founder of Gainforest, which is a decentralized science non-profit which uses emerging technologies to address the climate and biodiversity crisis. That's all very technical, but we will break it down because I definitely don't understand it. So please welcome Dr. David Dow. Thank you for coming, David. I'm sure you heard the last session, so
Yes.
we can draw on that if we need to. So David, I'm excited to talk to you today because what you're doing at Gainforest seems to be quite radical, actually, but it's very hard to understand. So let's break it down. If you had to kind of write an easy tagline for what Gainforest means, what would you say in one line?
Okay, that's a difficult one, but we describe ourselves as a decentralized science nonprofit that empowers and supports local communities, indigenous scientists, to hopefully win the next Nobel Prize.
Okay, good effort. So what is the problem? We're going to start with the problem and move to the solution. So what is the problem that you're trying to solve with Gainforest?
So look, my background is actually not very nature risk. I started as an AI researcher doing my PhD on algorithms with the aim and the hope to create these tech solutions that we're talking about all the time to monitor nature, biodiversity, to support the systems, the financial systems needed to provide change. But then when I looked at the data, my gosh, does anyone know? So in science, we have a global database, one place where all the biodiversity data in the world is collected, ever. Every data point from Alexander from Humboldt's first trip in South America to now. Do you know how much of that data is from North America and Europe? From that database?
Any guesses? I mean, I can't hear you if you shout, but you could give me some hands. 50%?
50%?
50%?
Higher than 50%? 70%?
80%?
It's
90%. Okay.
It's not 90, it's 86.3% of the world's biodiversity and nature data is in the global north. And believe it or not, the Amazon rainforest, the most biodiverse place in the world, has only 0.05% of data. So when I looked at this from an AI research, just from a scientific perspective, you put garbage data into the algorithm, and you get garbage results out.
Wow.
Right? And also it speaks of what Paul just said about the disconnect with us and nature. Because if you look at the data set, it looks not like the data set of biodiversity, it looks like the data set of global GDP. And that tells everything. It's like we feel all the disconnect of nature, but if you see it from the data, it becomes very clear.
Absolutely. So all of the data that we've got, or 86% of it on nature in the whole world, is basically 86% based on Europe and North America.
Yeah.
That's pretty outrageous since we have the Amazon, we have the Congo Basin, both two of the most biodiverse places in the world. They don't have much data collected on them. So now tell us what the solution is. What is your tech product trying to solve?
Look, initially we thought the solution is, okay, we go and collect more data. We build some top-down solution. Maybe we employ satellite data. Maybe we kind of build a tech company in Silicon Valley and go down and collect with robots. But no, the solution is much more obvious. The solution is to talk to the nature stewards and support them in becoming indigenous scientists, right? Indigenous data scientists that are able to collect this data and able to record and provide economic resilience and opportunity, right? Because I believe talent is equally distributed around the world, but opportunity is not. And instead of looking at the data gap as a challenge, we saw it as an economic opportunity. And what we do is very simple. We pay 1 cent per bioacoustic recording, 1 minute of the sound of the rainforest, and we pay 5 cents per drone image data in megabytes, and that's how we do it.
Wow. So communities on the ground, indigenous communities, I imagine mostly, is that who you work with mostly, indigenous people in communities in the global south? And so you give them the opportunity to record the nature data in their local area, and you pay them to do that.
Yeah.
So how does that work in terms of going into these communities and equipping them with that technology? How do they receive that? Do they see that as, big tech coming in trying to, techify our rainforest, or do they embrace it?
So I brought one of the sensors with me. So this thing is what we call a bioacoustic sensor. So we talked a lot about bioacoustic, but I really wanted to also show you what that data is, right? And you understand why it's so important for the communities to collect it and not us. So maybe I brought a sound from the Amazon in Manaus. I brought it here. If maybe the tech team can support me and play this small sound. And you will hear an animal. And if any one of you know what animal that is, please stretch your hand. Do you hear that hauling in the back? Maybe it's a little bit difficult. Oh, I see some people know that animal. I'm looking at some of the volunteers who wanted to play around and guess too. It's scary, that hauling.
Do you want to shout out what you think it is? Can you hear?
I think we can stop the sound. It's a monkey, yeah. Yeah.
It's a monkey?
It's.
Oh, you thought it was a cricket. She thought it was a cricket.
So this kind of hauling sound. When I first heard it in the Amazon, because I was with Marina Mura from the Mura tribe, and we just took one of these sensors out. We were collecting them and deploying them in the forest. I was scared to death because I thought it's some kind of jaguar that's coming to like eat me, but no, it's a small howler monkey. A monkey that has a really big mouth and like crawls. And she was laughing at me when I was like scared because she's like, David, this is just a little monkey. That tells you so much about that knowledge that the communities have. They hear it, they know it because this is their backyard, right? And so this data is super important for them to collect and empower. And I want to play another sound. So you just heard a sound from the Amazon rainforest, deeply, really biodiverse as we expect. But this sound is just next door. And listen to the difference. Notice how there's no howler monkey. It's also a forest, but you don't hear any birds. You don't hear any crickets. This is just wind, and you hear this like frog. Okay, thank you so much, tech team. What do you think? Why do you not hear life even though this is a forest? What do you think? What kind of forest is that? Yes.
I don't think this is set up for Q&A. We're probably on the wrong stage.
But I'm sure you have the right hinge.
We'll talk to you afterwards. It seems like you have some really good guesses. Maybe you should have a conversation afterwards. So tell us.
This is a monoculture, a timber farm planted for carbon credits.
Monoculture timber farm.
This is a carbon credit. This project has received carbon credits from companies here, and you can hear the difference of a healthy nature and a monoculture that this is a eucalyptus farm. Eucalyptus is the fastest growing tree in the world. Yeah. It grows in full size in 10 years. You use it to cut and do it for timber, but the leaves from the eucalyptus is toxic, such that there's no life, no biodiversity that you can hear. Wow. And I think that data, that's why it's so important to collect that data, to make informed decisions. And the fact that we don't have any data from these rainforests in the world is a shame.
Wow. So you said that there are going to be companies in this room today who have maybe bought carbon offsets in that forest that you just played from, which has presumably been stripped from a lot of its biodiversity, and it's become very monoculture planting. Yeah. Tell us a bit about carbon offsetting, because a lot of companies here, that will be a big part of their approach to reducing their carbon footprint. But I think what you want to do is you want to create an alternative for the carbon market with this, what you call conservation data market.
Yes.
What do you think is wrong with the current carbon offset market, and what are you going to do differently?
Look, so I had high hopes so my background is in math and physics, and I studied computer science. But when I looked at the carbon market, I have never seen anything more complicated than this. And the fact is, simply, if you dig into the math of how a carbon credit is calculated, you have something like an allometric equation. You estimate that a tree is a cylinder with a wood density, and that is like your first carbon credit, and you times it the number of trees you measure. Since when is a tree a cylinder? Like if you go to the mangroves in Southeast Asia, this is not a cylinder. So you already have fundamentally, when you do the science in the first layer, you have error, uncertainty, and then it will be only emphasized and accelerated by the lack of data that we see right now. So I think at its essence, what a carbon credit is in the voluntary market is a very beautifully wrapped data point. A data point that is collected on the ground and wrapped with methodologies, wrapped with reputation system, wrapped with certification. But it is a data point nonetheless. And so why don't we just pay the community straight for the data point instead of having them pay? Do you know how much it costs to set up a carbon credit project up front? Like, first of all, you need to have a large size to do so. No grassroots community can set up a carbon credit project by its own. You need to invest $500,000 just to do the paperwork for going to Vera and Gold Standard to do these carbon credits, right? So what we are thinking is, we're lacking data already. We don't have data. Data is really important, as we all know that who are the companies in the world that right now earn the most money? It's not nature-based companies. It is Google, Facebook, Amazon, and they all run on data, right? So why can't we have the same business model for nature? So we asking ourselves, we pay for the data collection. We make the threshold for communities to participate in data collections as low as possible, basically paying them a little bit of like a couple of cents upfront to get started. And then as they're collecting more and more data on their impact area, they also learn how to collect data. They get more capable in data management, and they become upskilling them, and they become super resilient.
And so if you're an indigenous person or indigenous community, or you live very rurally, and you get involved with what you're doing at Gainforest, and you start collecting data and you get paid for it, is that an amount of money that you would be able to live on, or is it just a few cents here and there?
Look, we sometimes forget what a few cents mean in these communities, right? Like a couple of cents don't make a difference in the country I'm based in Switzerland. You wouldn't even move your little pinky finger for a cent. But in Manaus, in the Amazon, $500 per month is all a family has with mom, dad, kids, grandma, grandpa. $500 a month. Yeah. Right? And that is literally nothing for us. This is how much we pay per Uber every month here in Paris. So these couple of cents, they might not make it fully, but they are a big incentive. And then what is beautiful about this data-driven funding pipeline, what we see is once people start collecting the first data points, they have enough money to, for example, buy a Starlink, get connected, this is $40 a month, and then they collect more and more data. And what we see is then that companies that care about impact reporting look at these projects and say, wow, this project has a lot of data now. So I want to look into it and I want to invest. And then we have many communities. So we work with 35 communities around the world.
35?
Yeah, 35. In the southern Philippines, in East Africa, and in the Amazon. From those 35, everyone is receiving conservation data income. That's what we call these kind of couple cents. And then 10 of them are now receiving additional funding from companies around the world that discovered them because of the data collection. And 2 of them have raised more money than our NGO because they got contracts with governments, with universities, because they are local indigenous data scientists. So their expertise is valued.
So as well as companies investing in these projects, you also give them kind of a lever for universities and for governments to also invest, to use that data for their own gain.
Yes.
Right. And something I'm really interested about Gainforest in is that it seems to be kind of greenwash proof in the sense that you use blockchain.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how many people know about blockchain. I know a bit about it. It's very complicated. But essentially, from what I understand, the way you use it is it's this decentralized system that's a bit like a spreadsheet, so that all of the money being put into this communities is tracked and traceable. So it means that you can't cheat because everyone can see and everyone would be able to, call you out if you were taking advantage or if you were not paying enough. So why is that such an integral part of what you do?
Look, it actually goes far beyond that. Like the simple act of transacting money from A to B, from Paris to Brazil. But the first time I wanted to send money to Brazil from Switzerland, $10. My Swiss bank called me 3 times, asking, David, what the heck is going on? Is this like some money laundering? And then I had to pay more transaction fee and wait 2 weeks until they received $10. How do you make conservation data income, these cents donations, with the current existing financial system? Well, blockchain actually is really beautiful. Just a simple act of transaction, banking the unbanked, because many of the communities around the world, they don't have even a bank account, right? But if you receive cryptocurrency, all you need, and actually cryptocurrency is highly adopted in South America because of this unstable currency that they are facing. So they're using something called stablecoins that is pegged to the US dollar, and all they need is just download an app, and they can receive instant these tiny cents of donations. And these are all traced and tracked and connected to the data points they collect. And in that way, the system is super transparent.
It's so interesting because we were just speaking to Weezer on the last panel, who lives in the Losa ecosystem in Sumatra, and she was saying that it's sometimes difficult to think about nature and tech in the same way because it seems like those two things are a paradox. And it's the same here with, you would never think, you know, that an indigenous tribe in the Amazon would be using cryptocurrency to be getting paid, but apparently that's what's happening, and they're really embracing it. Is that right?
Also, I want to emphasize that nature and technology is nature. If you look at, so I'm speaking of it as a technologist, but if you look at what technology is built of, it's built of the material of nature, silicon, electricity. These are all natural phenomena. How can we believe that technology and nature are separate? This is the whole problem we are looking at right now. The fact that we're disconnected from nature, and the fact that we also think, oh, it's cool for an indigenous community to do so.
Yeah.
No, they are the owners of original ancestral technology, right? And so we need to, first of all, need to change that mindset of that these are two separate things and it's like wondrous. No, these are actually perfectly supportive. If you look actually at the most promising people around the world when it comes to tech, I hate the term global south. I think it's a term that was imposed from somewhere top down because it has this poverty feeling on it. I use the term global majority because these countries have the youngest people in the world, the most tech curious people. You give them a drone, you don't have to tell them anything, they know how to fly the drone, like they ace it. I crash my drone more often than the indigenous people fly their drones. So
yeah, I would definitely crash the drone.
Yeah, so honestly, like this is together.
Okay, that's an amazing answer. So we've got to finish. So just the last question for you is, we've got an audience here. You know, if they're interested by the idea of Gainforest, and you know, obviously the carbon market has been mired in a bit of scandal over the last few years. So you know, this is a completely alternative model. What would you say to someone sitting in the audience who's interested in kind of getting involved? What can they do?
Look, if you're looking for an alternative for carbon credits, you should fund data collection because you're going to be the first person in the world who creates a data set in this area. You're going to be scientifically famous. So I think this is more bragging rights than like, okay, I saved this nature. So think about this. Scientifically, it makes totally sense to collect this data set. Also, for your business, it makes sense to justify your actions with data. So if you want to support, talk to us, of course. My team and I are here today at the stage. And I think this is something that you all should consider.
David. Thank you so much. And the sun has come out just as we're finishing. So thank you, sun.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.